Hello and welcome to Cat Yak, where everything's controlled by evil cats. My name's Beast. I'm a servant of the evil feline horde and your host. So let's get started. Today's literary adventure takes us back to the Goosebumps series with Goosebumps Book 3, Monster Blood. This book was written by R.L. Stine with cover art by Tim Jacobs. My review copy is the first edition, printed in September of 1992. The book has 128 pages, 29 chapters, and my copy of the book also has 2 preview chapters of the next book in the series, Say Cheese and Die. So let's take a look at the cover and see what we're in for. The cover of this book depicts a massive amount of blue-green slime cascading down a set of stairs with a pair of twisted glasses sitting on one of the steps. There's some flavor text on the cover that says, "It's a Monster Blood drive." So, based on the depiction on the cover and the title of the book, Monster Blood, it looks like we're going to be either dealing with a slime monster of some kind or some kind of bleeding monster. So let's flip to the back cover and see what kind of terror awaits us. Blood everywhere. While staying with his weird great-aunt Catherine, Evan visits a funky old toy store and buys a dusty can of Monster Blood. It's fun to play with at first, and Evan's dog Trigger likes it so much he eats some. But then Evan notices something weird about the green slimy stuff. It seems to be growing, and growing, and growing, and all that growing has given the Monster Blood a monstrous appetite. Readers beware, you're in for a scare. Goosebumps. Now, to be truthful with you, I've tried to record a review for this book several times because it's one of my favorite books out of the series from when I was a child, but I've never been really happy with how it turned out. It isn't that the book is bad. In fact, it's the exact opposite. This book is actually really good. The problems I have is with the continuity issues that pop up with the other 3 sequel books that follow it. This book also kind of starts a little trend in the series where the main characters start being rather annoying. But let's put that aside for the moment and dive into Monster Blood. The book opens by introducing us to our main character, Evan Ross, and his dog, Trigger. Evan is a red-haired child, and as the book opens, he's being a whiny little brat for the sake of being a whiny little brat. In fact, I'm already having flashbacks to Revolt of the Dwarves. Okay, actually, to be fair, Evan does have a decent reason to be upset. While his parents are going to be traveling to Atlanta, Georgia to be looking for a new house, he's going to be spending some time with his crazy great-aunt Catherine. The big problem is that she's deaf and refuses to learn sign language. But as it turns out, great-aunt Catherine isn't all that bad. Sure, she's a little strange, but the mean black cat she keeps, Sarah Beth, is a completely different story. In fact, it's because of Sarah Beth that Evan is forced to tie up his dog Trigger in the backyard. A while later, Evan decides to take his dog for a walk, and as he's doing so, he meets the second main character of the book, Andrea, or Andy to most people. If the 90s could be a person, Andy would be that example. Every time she shows up, she's wearing some kind of clashing neon clothing. But back to the story, Evan wants to go explore the neighborhood, and Andy, while riding her red BMX bikes, suggests that they go into town because she needs to buy something for her cousin's birthday. So off they go. This town apparently has 2 toy stores, and Andy takes Evan to her favorite one, the older one. Once at the shop, they look around, the things cluttering the place, but it isn't until Evan stumbles into a back room of sorts that he finds something interesting. It's a small blue can, about the size of a soup can, labeled Monster Blood. So apparently the big bad in the story is going to be an expired children's toy. Eventually, Evan buys the Monster Blood, and the 2 children and dog return back to Evan's great-aunt's house. When they return, they discover that Catherine is talking to Sarah Beth in the living room. He tries to introduce Andy to Catherine, but she seems more interested in the can of Monster Blood, and Sarah Beth just seems to be her mean old self. The 2 children excuse themselves and go up to the room Evan is staying in, and start to play with the monster blood. At first, it seems like it's just any other old slime toy. It's cold to the touch, it can be squeezed and stretched, and you can form it into a ball and it bounces, and it even glows in the dark. But one thing they discover is that the monster blood stains. So they take the can of goo and go into the backyard, where they continue to play with it. While throwing globs of monster blood back and forth, the children end up dropping one of the balls, and Trigger gets so excited he eats it. He seems to be alright, but now there's only half a can of the goo left. 3 days later, Evan's walking down the street and he runs into the town bullies. The bullies are a set of twins, and let me tell you, I personally despise these two. I personally have a very low tolerance to any person that torments or tortures pets, and these two trigger that instinct in me. We later find out that these two are being raised by their grandma, but she isn't home very often, so they pretty much spend their time unsupervised. Later, they tie a cat to a tree and also try to forcefully take Trigger from Evan. So needless to say, if they disappeared in this book, I absolutely wouldn't have a problem with that. But thankfully for Evan, Andy appears, and although she does get knocked over and her bike stolen by the two hoodlums, they leave and we don't have to deal with them for a little bit. Evan's plan for the day ruined, he returns back home. Upon returning home, Evan notices the can of monster blood is now almost full again, which surprises him, but apparently Trigger didn't eat that much, he decides, and he goes down to the backyard to check on his dog. Thankfully he does, because he discovers that Trigger is choking because his leather collar is now too small for him. Evan gets the collar off and muses that Trigger must have had a growth spurt. But then he also remembers that the dog is 12 years old. Now, according to my Google research, it says that the average lifespan of a Cocker Spaniel, which is the breed Trigger is roughly between 12 to 15 years. So in fact, in dog years, Trigger is considered to be ancient and should not be having any kind of growth spurt this late in his life. The next morning, Evan goes to see Andy again, and he finds her trying to release a cat that the two twins had tied to a tree. When finished, they return to Evan's room, and they discover that the monster blood is now spilling out of its original container. They put it in an empty coffee can, and then they also notice that the slime has started to change. It's no longer cold to the touch. In fact, it's actually rather warm, and it's now more runny and sticky. The two have a monster blood fight until dinner, when they discover that Trigger has now doubled in size. After having a horrible nightmare, Evan awakes in the middle of the night and discovers the monster blood has almost filled the coffee can. The next day at the local vet, the vet tech says that Trigger is in perfect health. It's strange that he had a growth spurt, and he decides to run a few tests, but there's nothing to be worried about. On his way back to his great aunt's, Evan and Trigger once again run into the two twins. After they bully Evan and try to take Trigger forcefully, Trigger seems to snap and starts to growl at them. And with his now larger size and strength, he pulls free and starts chasing the twins away. Later that day, after catching Trigger, Evan goes over to Andy's house with a bucket. The monster blood has once again grown, and he needs her to take some of it off of his hands. Andy takes half a can full, and then Evan goes to return home, but once again, he's confronted by the two twins. They attack him, and the bucket of monster blood is knocked over. By the time he recovers, and with Andy's help, he scoops the spilled monster blood into the bucket. But the bucket is almost full again. That night after dinner, Evan thinks about telling his great aunt about the monster blood, but stops because he thinks she's just too weird. He sneaks the now almost overflowing bucket of monster blood down into the basement and dumps it into an old bathtub. The only problem is he slips and falls in, and while he's trying to get out, he discovers that the warm slime feels like it's trying to suck him in, and he almost feels like he's drowning. But after he finally pulls himself out, he notices that Sarah Beth is watching him. The next morning, Evan finally breaks down and writes a message to his great aunt, telling her about his problem with the monster blood. But she just laughs maniacally at him and tells him she told him to be careful with it. After calling Andy, the two finally realize that the only thing that they can really do is take the monster blood back to the shop where they bought it. After loading the monster blood into large garbage bags, they head into town, and soon they discover that the old toy store is now boarded up and closed. Defeated, the two drag the two garbage bags of monster blood back to Aunt Catherine's house, and toss them into an old garbage can beside the house. The two children sit in the backyard, but are soon interrupted by Aunt Catherine as she appears holding a telegram. Evan takes the telegram and reads it and discovers it's from his mom, saying that she'll be back soon to come and get him. Evan is overexcited, but his mood suddenly changes as Trigger, now the size of a pony, comes racing up from the backyard and knocks over the garbage can full of monster blood. Then the puddle of monster blood seems to come alive. First, it throws itself against the garbage wall, then it starts racing towards Evan and Andy. The two run into the front yard, the giant glob of monster blood bouncing after them, consuming things as it goes, like a robin that was trying to eat a worm. Just then, the terrible twins appear and try to pick a fight with Evan. Thankfully, they end up getting consumed by the blob of monster blood, and in fact, there are several scenes later in the book where it says you can see their forms sloshing around inside the ball of monster blood. Aunt Catherine opens the front door to see what's going on, and the monster blood turns toward her, and then rushes to the front door. Catherine escapes back inside, and the monster blood follows after her. Evan and Andy run inside and discover the glob of monster blood has his great aunt pinned in the corner of the living room, and this is where we discover the truth of what has been happening. Great Aunt Catherine is actually a witch, and apparently she was forced to put a magic spell on the monster blood to teach Evan a lesson. And the person that made her do this is standing behind Evan. Evan spins around and sees Andy, but then he notices Sarah Beth sitting behind Andy on the stairs, glaring at him. Sarah Beth slowly starts morphing into a young woman with pale skin, red hair, and bright yellow eyes. Yes, it was Sarah Beth that made her deaf and made her not be able to get any help or learn sign language, and she is the one that has been controlling the monster blood all this time. Sarah Beth then proceeds to monologue about how she's going to kill the children, but Evan and Andy move too quickly and soon rush towards Sarah Beth, causing the monster blood to shoot toward them. They dodge out of the way just as the monster blood collides into her, and Sarah Beth is sucked deep inside. The giant glob of monster blood then starts to shrink, and soon the twins and the bird from earlier are released, and the monster blood evaporates away, but Sarah Beth never appears. And as this is happening, Trigger begins to shrink back to his normal size. The twins stumble out of the house just as Evan's mom shows up, ready to take him to his new life in Atlanta. Andy promises that she'll use her father's prepaid cell phone to keep in touch, but her only regret was that there wasn't something that she could keep as a memento, because all of the monster blood is now gone. The end. This book is actually really good. But there are a few key things in this book that you need to remember. 1. Evan was scared of the monster blood. 2. The monster blood made Trigger grow when he ate it. 3. Andy knows what the monster blood is capable of doing. 4. The monster blood by itself was just a toy with no special powers. It was a combination of Great Aunt Catherine's and Sabrina's magic that turned it into a monster. These key elements are important. The only part I didn't like about this book was obviously the twins. And surprisingly, if you read the Dutch version of this book, the twins don't actually escape/reappear at the end of the book. So I'm adding them to my unofficial Goosebumps death counter. Overall, this is an excellent addition to the Goosebumps series. This was actually the first book that R.L. Stine wrote for the series, but it ended up getting printed third by Scholastic. I give Monster Blood 4.5 out of 5 paws.